We got Roscoe when my son was 17, almost 18. I want to sit with that for a moment because the timing matters in ways I did not anticipate. Every conversation I had encountered about dogs and neurodivergent children assumed the child was young, a small person, still forming, still receiving information about the world in that early childhood way, where everything is plastic and possible. The narrative was always, get the dog early, grow up together, let the bond form in those formative years when the nervous system is still learning what safe feels like. We did not do that. By the time Roscoe came home, my son was nearly an adult. His patterns, the heavy hands, the variable volume, the way frustration moved through his body before he could name it, were already deeply set. He was not going to grow out of them. He was going to learn to work with them, slowly, over years, but the core wiring was what it was. And Roscoe was less than 20 weeks old. What nobody had prepared me for was the particular difficulty of a puppy arriving into a household anchored by a teenage, neurodivergent boy. Not the difficulty of either of them alone. The difficulty of the two of them together, at those specific ages, in that specific condo, with me in the middle, trying to figure out what I was looking at. This is Under the Same Roof. I'm Jennyfer Tan, professional dog trainer and certified family dog mediator, and this is episode 18. Last episode, we talked about the 3 to 6 problem, the hardest window of the school day, and what it costs both the child and the dog when a nervous system that has been holding it together all day finally comes home to release everything it was carrying. This episode moves through time. We're talking about the teenage years specifically, what it actually looks like when a neurodivergent teenager and a reactive dog are navigating each other, what the developmental stakes are for both of them, and what I wish I had understood before Roscoe came home. A very young puppy is an invitation to chaos. That is simply what they are. Fast, unpredictable, physically uninhibited, with no understanding of personal space, of volume, of the concept that some beings in the room need things to be a certain way. A puppy's entire operating mode in those early months is, something is happening, I will launch myself at it. For a lot of children, this is delightful. For a teenager with autism whose nervous system was already working overtime to manage the sensory load of daily life, it was not delightful. It was a lot. My son's response to Roscoe in those early months was one of the more complicated things I watched unfold in that household. He loved the dog. I never doubted that, not once. But love and capacity are different things. He wanted to engage with Roscoe. He did not always have the bandwidth to do it in a way that was good for either of them. He would reach for him too fast, and Roscoe would scramble. He would play too rough, not from meanness, but from that same mismatch in self-regulation that showed up everywhere in his life. And sometimes he would simply avoid Roscoe entirely, retreating to his room, which I eventually understood as self-protection rather than indifference. Meanwhile, Roscoe was learning what humans were, and some of what he was learning in those early weeks was that the tall teenage human in this household was unpredictable. That learning went in. I did not fully understand at the time how much it went in, or how long it would take to revise. When I think back on that period now, with everything I understand that I did not understand then, what I see is two beings in the middle of their most intense developmental phase, each of them running close to their limit in different ways. The teenage brain is in a period of profound reorganization. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for impulse regulation, executive function, the ability to pause between an impulse and an action, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. In an autistic teenager, this developmental timeline interacts with a nervous system that was already working harder than average just to process the sensory world. The result is a young person who is capable of remarkable things, and who is also genuinely limited in ways that are not choices. My son could not always slow down when he reached for Roscoe. He could not always modulate his voice in those first minutes after school. He could not always read the dog's signals in time to change course. Not because he did not care, because the machinery that would have allowed him to do those things was not yet fully assembled. And Roscoe, for his part, was in his own rapid developmental phase. The socialization window, that critical early period when a dog is forming his fundamental understanding of what is safe, what is threatening, what humans do and mean and predict, was opening and closing in those first months. What he experienced during that window became the baseline, not a lesson that could be easily unlearned, the baseline. I was trying to protect both of them simultaneously. I was not always succeeding. There is no clean line, but there were changes, gradual, unmistakable over time, even if invisible day by day. My son, moving through 18 and into his early 20s, began to have more access to himself. That is the best way I know to describe it. The impulsivity that had characterized his teenage years, the sharpest edges of it, began to dull slightly. Not because he was cured of anything, because the developmental process was doing what it does, slowly building the regulatory capacity that had been under construction all along. He began to catch himself more often, to notice that his hands were too heavy before Roscoe moved away, not after, to lower his voice sometimes, deliberately, because he had learned to read what the raised voice cost the room. This is not a small thing. It took years, painfully slow, in my mind, but it happened. And Roscoe, who had formed his early impression of my son in those chaotic puppy months, began, almost imperceptibly, to revise it. The revision was slow, and it was not complete, but the wariness softened, the distance narrowed. Small things, but real. This is something I have written about before in this series, and I keep coming back to it because I think it is the most important thing I understand about Roscoe and my son's relationship. They recognize something in each other. They might not even be aware of it. Not abstractly. I mean something specific. Roscoe and my son share a frequency. Both of them are super smart and acutely tuned to their environments. Both of them need routine and predictability in ways that most beings around them do not. Both of them struggle with the social nuances that other people and other dogs navigate more fluidly. Both of them run hot. The stress bucket fills fast. The recovery takes time. The threshold is lower than most people realize. My son is like the human Roscoe. Roscoe is the dog version of my son. What I noticed, as my son moved through his late teens and into young adulthood, was that this recognition began to work in both directions. Roscoe started reading my son the way he reads me on my hard days, with a particular quality of attention that is different from how he tracks anyone else. Not the playful engagement he has with my daughter, not the deep, settled calm he finds beside my husband. Something more alert than that, more attuned, as if he understood that this particular person required a different kind of watching. And my son, who has always found human social cues genuinely hard, discovered that Roscoe's signals, once he learned to read them, made a particular kind of sense to him. The logic of a nervous system that runs hot and needs things a certain way and communicates in body language rather than words. That was familiar territory. It was, in some ways, his own experience translated. I do not need that to be scientifically provable to believe it is real. The early months with Roscoe were formative in ways I did not fully protect him from. The socialization window closed with some experiences in it that I wish had been different. Some of the vigilance Roscoe carries now, the particular way he tracks unpredictable movement, the speed with which a sudden voice spike raises his threshold. Some of that was shaped in those months, not by malice, not even by negligence, by the reality that I was trying to manage a household with multiple high-need beings in it, and I did not always have the knowledge or the bandwidth to protect the puppy from the teenager, and the teenager from the puppy at the same time. This is not the same as saying I failed. I did the best I could with what I understood at the time, but I also know now that Roscoe's nervous system was shaped partly by those early experiences, and that the work of helping him feel safer has been, in some ways, the work of revising an impression that was formed before I knew enough to prevent it. That is a particular kind of grief, and I think it is worth acknowledging. If you are at the beginning of this, if you have a neurodivergent teenager and you are considering getting a dog, or you have just brought one home, I want you to know that the timing matters, not as a reason not to do it, but as information. The puppy's socialization window and the teenager's developmental stage are both real constraints, and the more clearly you see them, the more deliberately you can work within them. It is not too late to change the trajectory, whatever the starting point, but understanding the starting point honestly is where that work begins. My son is a young adult now. He works at an auto shop in an environment that suits him, physical, purposeful, with a logic he finds satisfying. He has built routines that work with his brain rather than against it. He has grown into himself in ways I am glad I lived to see. And Roscoe, who is no longer young either, has grown into himself too. He is still reactive. He still runs hot. He still needs the household to be a certain way in order to feel okay. But within that, he has found his people. And my son is one of them. Not the easiest one. Not the one who gives him the most settled comfort, but one of them. One of his mirrors. A presence that, after all these years, he has learned to read. The bond that exists between them now did not look like anything I planned for. It did not arrive in those early puppy months when I hoped it would. It arrived slowly, shaped by the particular friction of two nervous systems that were hard for each other, finding their way to something that worked. That is the shape of it, and it is real. Next episode, we stay in this question of time, but we shift to something I've been thinking about for a while and have not yet spoken about directly. What does it look like when a neurodivergent young adult begins to take on responsibility for a dog's care? Not because they have been assigned it, but because they are ready, or beginning to be ready. What does readiness even mean in this context? That is episode 19. I'm Jennyfer Tan. This is Under the Same Roof. Understanding before strategies, always.